God decides humanity is done. Not a meteor, not a plague, not nuclear war. God himself looks down at what he made, decides it was a mistake, and sends his army to fix it. And his army isn't nukes or plagues, it's angels. Beings older than the universe itself, dropping into human bodies and turning them into something violent and almost impossible to kill. Your neighbor, your mom, the cashier at the gas station, any of them could be one. You wouldn't know until it was too late. The enemy, the weapons, the survival logic, it is one of the most terrifying apocalypse scenarios ever put to screen. Not because of the monsters, but because of who the monsters are. And because of one question the film keeps asking in the background: what would actually happen if this started right now? That's what this video is. Let's get into it. So before we talk survival, we need to understand what we're actually dealing with. Because Legion has one of the most underrated threat premises in the genre. The possessed aren't zombies in the traditional sense. They're not infected. Nobody bit anybody. There's no patient zero. There's no virus spreading through a population over weeks or months. What's happening is an instantaneous global possession event. Angels descending, taking over human bodies, and the people inside those bodies just cease to exist. They're erased. What's left is a shell running on divine energy, and it has strength, pain resistance, and capabilities that no human body should naturally have. In the film, you watch a woman who looks completely normal walk into a diner. Sweet older lady, the kind of woman who reminds you of your grandmother. And within 60 seconds, she's crawling on the ceiling and biting out someone's throat. That's the horror of this scenario. It's not a horde you can see coming from a distance. It's your neighbor checking on you through the door. It's the trucker who offers you a ride on I-20. It's the paramedic who shows up after the car accident. The possessed retain the appearance of normal humans until they don't. And there's no test, no way to scan for it, no telltale sign until the violence starts. And here's the thing about their capabilities that makes this genuinely unmanageable. In a standard zombie outbreak, Walking Dead rules, Dawn of the Dead rules, the infected are slower, dumber, and weaker than a living human. The zombie is a threat because of numbers and because of what a bite means. One-on-one, a healthy adult can handle a walker. You can outrun it, you can outmaneuver it. The possessed in Legion are the opposite. They're faster, they're stronger. Multiple gunshots don't stop them because the angel inside doesn't care what's happening to the body. The body is a vehicle. While the angel is present, that vehicle keeps moving regardless of what you do to it. You'd need to destroy the body completely. And we're talking about trying to do that in a crowd, potentially in your living room while you're terrified and probably unarmed. Michael explains it plainly in the film. God has run out of patience. This isn't punishment, it's execution. The order that came down was total extinction, and the only thing that might change that order is the child Charlie is carrying. A baby born at a roadside diner in the middle of the Mojave Desert. A child who, according to Michael, represents the last chance for humanity to demonstrate that it was worth keeping. The angels want that baby dead specifically, and every human being on Earth is a potential weapon against it. Now, let's talk about the hierarchy, because this is important, and the film doesn't spend enough time on it. The street-level threat, the possessed civilians, those are dangerous, but they're manageable in small numbers with the right firepower. What they represent, though, is a delivery mechanism for a higher order threat. Above them is Gabriel. Gabriel doesn't need a body. Gabriel shows up in his own form with his own armor, with wings that he uses as weapons. He is not a corrupted human being. He is an archangel, a being built specifically for war, with thousands of years of combat experience, and a physical form that exists outside the limitations of human biology entirely. When Gabriel enters the film's final act, the rules change completely. Guns become essentially irrelevant. The gap between what he is and what the survivors are becomes almost impossible to calculate. That matters for our survival analysis because it means the threat isn't flat. It has layers. You could theoretically survive the first wave, but the first wave isn't the end of the problem. Let's be honest about what humanity brings to this fight. On paper, the numbers look impressive. The United States military alone has over 1 million active duty personnel. We've got Abrams tanks, Apache helicopters, HIMARS systems, aircraft carriers, nuclear submarines, and yes, a nuclear arsenal capable of ending most forms of life on this continent. We have the most advanced conventional military ever assembled in human history. And against an enemy you can't identify until they're already killing you, most of that is worthless. ridiculous. Think about the fundamental problem. The possessed look like normal people. They are normal people until the moment they aren't. So the first question any military commander would face in this scenario is, who do I shoot? If you're in Chicago and 30% of the city is possessed and you can't tell which 30%, what's the call? Do you establish a perimeter? How? Your perimeter soldiers might be possessed. Do you order airstrikes on populated areas? You're killing the people you're supposed to be protecting. Do you implement a shoot-on-sight policy for civilians? That's a war crime and also operationally impossible to enforce when your own chain of command might be compromised. This is the trap. The possessed aren't an invading army. They're already inside the wire. They've always been inside the wire. There is no wire anymore. Katrina showed us what government failure looks like when the crisis is relatively contained and the enemy is a hurricane. COVID showed us what institutional breakdown looks like when the threat is invisible and spreads slowly. Now imagine both of those things simultaneously worldwide with no warning, and the threat actively trying to kill people rather than passively spreading. FEMA's disaster response protocols assume a functioning chain of command. They assume communications infrastructure. They assume that the people executing the response aren't part of the disaster. In the Legion scenario, none of those assumptions hold. The CDC's quarantine protocols are built around biological threats with identifiable markers. There's no quarantine for divine possession. You can't contact trace it. You can't develop a vaccine. You can't even define patient zero because there is no patient zero. There's a deity who made a decision, and that decision is being implemented everywhere simultaneously. The National Guard gets called up. Some of them are already possessed when the call comes in. Some get possessed while they're suiting up. Some make it to their armories, establish checkpoints, and start running patrols. And then one of their guys turns, and the whole forward operating base goes down in 60 seconds, and the weapons. This is the part that should terrify you more than anything else. Every gun in America is still a gun. Every AR-15 in every gun cabinet in every house in rural Georgia is still loaded. Every military installation still has its ordnance. The possessed can use all of it. A possessed National Guard sergeant with access to an M4 and 100 rounds of 5.56 is a nightmare scenario. A possessed Air Force pilot in a loaded F-35 is a civilization-ending scenario. We built these weapons, we left them everywhere, and now potentially anyone can pick them up. Okay, let's run the scenario. The Legion apocalypse starts right now. Possession events begin simultaneously worldwide. We're following the logic of the film, which implies global simultaneous activation. Let's trace the first 72 hours as realistically as I can. Hour 1. The calls start flooding 911. Scattered incidents. A man attacking his family in a Memphis suburb. A woman going berserk in a Chicago Walgreens. A trucker on I-40 in Oklahoma suddenly driving his rig through a rest stop. Dispatchers think it's isolated. Mental health incidents, possible drug events, standard protocol. The hospitals start seeing the first cases around the same time. ERs in major cities log patients who were attacked by someone with what looks like superhuman strength. Bite wounds, crushing injuries. Staff are already stretched from a normal Tuesday. Then the staff starts going down too. By hour 2, it's clear something is coordinated and national. The EAS system activates, Presidential Emergency Broadcast. But here's the problem. The people writing that broadcast, the people in the situation room making decisions, any of them could already be possessed. The broadcast that goes out might be accurate, or it might be designed to keep people calm while the possessed move into position. Social media goes haywire. Footage is everywhere. Chicago, Atlanta, Phoenix, New York, simultaneous incidents on every platform. The information is real, but there's no framework for it. People don't know what they're looking for. They don't know how to identify a threat that looks exactly like a human being. By hour 3, the power grid starts having problems, not because infrastructure was destroyed, but because the people who monitor and operate it are either dead, fled, or possessed. Substations go unmanned. Automated systems compensate for a while, then cascade failures begin. By hour 6, major metropolitan areas are functionally ungovernable. Now here's where American gun culture becomes a double-edged sword. And I want to be real about this because it matters. There are something like 400 million civilian-owned firearms in the United States. That's more guns than people. And in a scenario where the threat is inside your house, before you know there's a threat, a Mossberg 500 in the bedroom closet is the difference between living and dying in the first hour. Absolutely. A rancher in rural Montana with a .357 and a chest freezer full of food is going to outlast a family in a Manhattan high-rise by weeks, maybe months. But here's the other side. In a densely populated area, when everyone is armed and nobody can identify identify who the threat actually is. The guns become a multiplier for chaos. A neighborhood in suburban Atlanta. Everybody armed, everybody terrified, nobody sure who just got possessed. That AR-15 in the garage is still gonna get used, but not always on the right target. The incidence of friendly fire, non-possessed people shooting other non-possessed people out of fear, would be enormous. It's not a reason to not be armed, it's just reality. By the end of day one, the major cities are gone. The people who made it out are the ones who moved fast, the ones who had somewhere to go. Preppers who'd been laughed at for years suddenly look like prophets. The guy with the bug out bag and the cabin in the Appalachians, the family with the farmstead in rural Tennessee, those people have a shot. The suburbs are chaos. Waves of people trying to evacuate on interstate highways that are already clogged because everyone had the same idea at the same time. Gas stations running dry within hours because panic buying stripped them clean. And those long lines of stalled vehicles on I-75 or I-95, those are hunting grounds. You're stuck in your car, you can't move, and the threat can approach from any direction wearing a human face. Day two. The National Guard units that held together are trying to establish safe zones. Stadiums, fairgrounds, large parking structures. The problem is the same problem it's always been. No way to screen for possession. You set up a checkpoint outside the Georgia Dome. You're checking people in, and 3 of your checkpoint soldiers are possessed, and the possessed civilians get through, and your safe zone stops being safe inside of an hour. This is the COVID testing problem, but the stakes are incomparably higher. You'd need a reliable, fast possession detection method. There isn't one. The film doesn't give you one. In the real world, you don't have one. The survivor groups that form on day 2 are mostly small. Families, neighbors who happen to be home, groups that met at a Costco or a Bass Pro and started working together out of mutual necessity. The ones that survive this phase are the ones with 3 things: food and water for at least a week, weapons and enough ammo to last, and most critically, a group that can actually function without tearing itself apart. That last part is the hard one, because the Howard problem kicks in immediately. Every survivor group is gonna have a Howard. The person who hoards, who lies about resources, who considers abandoning the others when things get bad, who makes a unilateral decision that endangers everyone because they were calculating their own odds. And unlike in the film, where Howard is one person in a group of 8, in a real survivor group, that dynamic spreads. It becomes a culture. Because everyone has been through something traumatic now, and trauma does things to how people cooperate. Day 3. The numbers are brutal. If you model this with anything like realistic parameters, simultaneous global possession affecting even 20% of the population, cities already collapsed, infrastructure failing, survivor groups destabilizing, you're looking at non-possessed humanity representing maybe 5 to 10% of where it started 72 hours ago. And it's still going down because the possessed don't stop. They're not burning out. They're not running out of fuel. They're executing an order from a being that, within the logic of this film, is infinite. 5%, maybe less, and those people are scattered. Rural holdouts, military remnants, small groups in defensible terrain, the Appalachians, the Montana mountains, deep in the Texas hill country, not connected, not coordinated, running on whatever supplies they grabbed in the first hours, rationing ammunition, trying to figure out who in their group can still be trusted. That's humanity at hour 72. The film ends on something like hope. Charlie's baby survives. Michael sacrifices himself and gets brought back. Jeep drives toward an uncertain future with the child who might somehow represent a second chance. But the film earns that ending by being pretty clear about what led to it. One angel who was willing to go against everything he was created to be because he chose to believe in people, and a handful of ordinary, messy, flawed humans who barely managed to stop tearing each other apart long enough to survive one night. That's a thin margin. That is an extremely thin margin. And here's what stays with me about Legion. It's not really asking whether we could survive God's army. That's almost beside the point. What it's really asking is whether we're worth saving, whether the qualities that make us human, the stubbornness, the irrational love, the willingness to sacrifice for someone else, whether those things are enough to justify our continued existence. Michael thinks so. He bets everything on it. The film doesn't tell you he's right. It just shows you the bet. What do you think? If something with real knowledge of human nature looked at the world today, not the best of us, not the worst, just the actual average, would it decide we're worth the trouble? Drop it in the comments. I genuinely want to know where you land on that. If you made it this far, thank you. Seriously. If you liked the video, hit that like button, subscribe if you're new, and I'll see you in the next one.